While recovering from a crash on the way to see my brother, my parents claimed I was trying to upstage his engagement party. Hey everyone, so I need to get something off my chest. It's one of those stories that feels almost too crazy to believe, but trust me, it's all real. I'm me, just your regular person, trying to get through life and figure out where I fit in. But the one thing that always seemed to mess with me the most was my family, particularly my parents. They've never been the warmest or most supportive, and to be honest, I've just learned to live with it. Now, I've got a brother, and I know what you're probably thinking, sibling rivalry. But it's a lot deeper than that. You see, my brother is everything in my parents' eyes. Perfect, charming, all the things I was never quite able to be. So when I found out he was getting engaged, yeah, I was happy for him, but I wasn't exactly jumping up and down. Still, family's family, right? So when I got the invite to his engagement party, I knew I had to go. I was determined to show up and just be there for him. Maybe this time, things would be different. Maybe my parents would actually notice me. Maybe, just maybe, they'd see that I mattered. But life had other plans. I'm driving there, all excited about finally being included, when everything goes sideways. Out of nowhere, some idiot runs a red light, and before I knew it, my car was wrecked, and I was sitting there, dazed, in the middle of the road. I swear I heard nothing but my heart pounding in my chest. I managed to get out of the car, shaken but okay, and when the cops and paramedics showed up, I thought, okay, no big deal, I'll be fine. I'll just get patched up and make it to the party. But this is where things take a turn. I finally make it to my brother's engagement party. Late, but still ready to make the best of it. I thought my family would at least be concerned, ask me if I was okay, make sure I was all right. But no. The moment I walked in, there was a shift in the room. It wasn't the warm greeting I was expecting. My parents, they didn't even look at me like they cared about the crash. No, instead, they were all cold, stiff smiles, and there was this weird vibe in the air. And that's when it hit me. My mom, of all people, came up to me and, without even asking if I was hurt or anything, said, this is your brother's big moment. Don't ruin it. I just stared at her, confused. What? Ruin it? Ruin his engagement party? And then it hit me like a slap in the face. My own parents, the people I've tried to impress my whole life, they were accusing me of trying to ruin the party. As if I'd planned this whole crash just to steal attention from my brother. It was honestly the last thing I expected to hear. And it stung in a way I couldn't put into words. But that's the crazy part. The real shocker was the way they acted. They weren't even worried about me. They didn't care that I was hurt or that I'd just gone through something traumatic. They cared about one thing, making sure nothing took the spotlight off my brother. Not even my accident. And that's when I knew something wasn't right. Something wasn't adding up. How could they say that to me? How could they accuse me of trying to ruin something I was just trying to show up for? The whole night felt like a blur after that, but trust me, what happened next only made things worse. It all happened so fast. 1 minute, I'm cruising down the highway, just trying to get to my brother's engagement party, and the next thing I know, boom. Everything goes black. It felt like I had no time to react. The sound of crunching metal echoed in my ears, and for a split second, all I could do was freeze. It was like the world went quiet in that moment, and then bang, the car swerved, and I felt myself thrown to the side. My heart was pounding in my chest, but everything felt distant, like I was watching myself from the outside. The airbags deployed, puffing up in front of me, and the smell of burned rubber filled the car. My head was throbbing, and there was this awful taste of metal in my mouth. I couldn't focus. Everything was a blur. I blinked a few times, trying to get my bearings, but it was like the world was spinning, and I was stuck in this weird haze. I slowly lifted my hand to my forehead, feeling the sticky wetness of blood there. My side hurt like hell, and I wasn't sure if it was from the impact or if something was seriously wrong. I tried to take a deep breath, but it felt tight. My body wasn't quite cooperating. But then, despite the pain and confusion, there was something in me that refused to give up. I needed to get to that party. I told myself over and over, just breathe, you can make it. Because honestly, that's all that mattered right then. My brother was getting engaged. I had to be there. I wasn't going to let this crash stop me. I reached for my phone, my hands shaking, and somehow managed to unlock it. I was hoping it wasn't too late, hoping I wasn't about to miss everything. But as soon as I opened my messages, there it was. My brother had texted, "The party's starting in 30 minutes, you good? Don't want you to miss this." The words hit me like a punch in the stomach. I had just been in a wreck, barely hanging on, but there it was. 30 minutes. My heart skipped a beat. I couldn't be late. Not again. Not for him. I didn't even think about the pain or the fact that I might need medical attention. I just stared at my phone, my mind racing. Okay, just get there. You're fine. You'll be fine. I kept telling myself, even though I knew deep down I wasn't fine. But the thought of not showing up, of missing his big day after everything, pushed me to keep going. So with one hand on the steering wheel, I somehow managed to drive. Every bump in the road felt like a punch to my body, but I gritted my teeth and powered through. I couldn't think about the crash anymore. I had to think about getting to the party, about not letting this become a reason I missed something important. The next thing I knew, I was being loaded into an ambulance. The sirens were wailing in my ears, and the paramedics were rushing around, checking me over. I couldn't focus on anything except the pain in my side and the dull throbbing in my head. But as they hooked me up to all the machines, trying to get my vitals stable, my mind kept wandering. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something, or maybe, more accurately, that something was slipping away from me. I remember the look on the paramedic's face when he asked if I was okay. I wanted to say, I'm fine, I'm okay, but it didn't feel true. How could I be? My body hurt, my mind was clouded, but more than anything, it felt like I was falling apart emotionally. And why? Because this wasn't just about the crash, it was about everything else that had been building up for years. As the ambulance sped toward the hospital, my mind drifted to my brother. His engagement. I hadn't expected it to hit me so hard, but I thought about how he'd always been the golden child, the one who never seemed to have to fight for their place in the family. Growing up, I always felt like I was chasing after approval. His successes, his accomplishments, always seemed to come easy. Meanwhile, I worked twice as hard to get the slightest bit of recognition. I thought about the engagement, about how excited he looked when he told me. I was genuinely happy for him. I was, but at the same time, it made me feel invisible. I don't even know why I cared so much. But the reality was, when I was growing up, my parents always celebrated his wins, while mine barely registered. When I graduated college, there was no big party, no fanfare. When I got a promotion at work, they didn't even acknowledge it. It was as if everything I did wasn't enough to break through that shadow he cast over everything. The ambulance door swung open, pulling me out of my head, and I was rushed into the ER. The staff was gentle, calm. They told me everything would be fine. They kept reassuring me that nothing was broken, just bruises and cuts. But as I lay there, I couldn't help but feel a pit in my stomach. Everything they were saying didn't matter to me. The physical pain didn't matter. All I could think about was how my parents would react, how they would blame me for being late, for possibly ruining the evening, for drawing attention away from my brother's moment. I could already hear my mom's voice in my head, scolding me. Why can't you just be happy for him? She'd say. Why do you always have to make everything about you? Those words haunted me now more than ever. Every time I tried to stand out, to do something for myself, it felt like I was wrong. Like I was just a disappointment, a problem that needed fixing. I wasn't the perfect child, the one they could brag about to their friends or show off to relatives. I was the one they ignored, the one they tried to fix. As the doctors took care of the cuts on my forehead and wrapped up my side, I tried not to think about what was waiting for me at the party. I didn't even know if I could show up anymore. But I had to. I had no choice. I had to at least try to prove that I cared about my brother, even if I felt like I was invisible in my own family. After what felt like an eternity in that hospital, I finally managed to gather myself enough to leave. The doctors told me I'd be fine, just some bruises, cuts, and soreness. Nothing serious. But honestly, I wasn't even sure if I believed them. My head was still foggy, and my side throbbed with every step I took. But I wasn't going to let that stop me. My brother's engagement party was happening, and I had to be there. I grabbed my things, nodded at the nurse as I walked out, and made my way to the car. Every movement hurt, but I wasn't about to turn back now. I was already late, and I couldn't let this chance slip away. I don't know why it mattered so much. Maybe because I knew, deep down, this was one of the rare moments when I actually had the chance to be part of something. Maybe it was because I just wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't always the one left behind. I arrived at the venue a little more than an hour after the party had started. I could hear the laughter and music from outside as I approached. It was a nice place, beautifully decorated, just like my brother always liked. The lights were warm, casting a golden glow across the room. People were mingling, drinks in hand, and there was a buzz of excitement in the air. But as soon as I walked in, everything seemed to stop. The moment I stepped through the door, I felt all eyes on me. It wasn't the warm welcome I'd hoped for. It wasn't the "are you okay?" or "thank goodness you made it" that I thought I'd get. No, it was something colder, like a chill had swept through the room. My parents were standing off to the side, talking to a few family members. And when they saw me, their faces didn't soften, no relief, no concern. Instead, their eyes went narrow, their mouths tightened, and they exchanged this look I couldn't quite read, but I knew it wasn't good. My mother was the first to speak. "Where have you been?" Her voice was sharp, almost accusing, as if I had done something wrong. She didn't ask about the crash, about how I was feeling, or if I was hurt. No. The first thing out of her mouth was a question about my timing. "This is a special moment for your brother. And you're just walking in now?" My father didn't say anything at first, but the disappointment in his eyes was clear. He didn't even look concerned about my well-being. Instead, he shot me a cold glance, then turned back to the group, like I wasn't even worth his time. I felt my heart sink. This wasn't how I imagined this night would go. I was here, against all odds, and instead of being greeted with warmth, I was met with criticism. I opened my mouth to explain, but before I could say a word, my mom cut me off. "You're late," she said again, this time with an edge in her voice. "You've interrupted the special moment. Do you even care about your brother's happiness, or is this just about you?" The words hit harder than I expected. I swallowed, trying to hold back the wave of emotions that were threatening to break through. I tried to explain, tried to tell her about the crash, but she wasn't having it. "Oh, I'm sure the crash was an accident," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "But let's be real. You've always had a way of stealing the spotlight. Don't think I don't see what you're doing. It's always about you, isn't it?" I froze. "What? Steal the spotlight?" I had just gotten into a car accident, and she thought I was doing this for attention. How could she say that? How could she accuse me of trying to upstage my brother's engagement when all I was doing was showing up, battered and bruised, to be part of something important to him? I felt my face flush with anger and embarrassment, but I didn't argue. I couldn't. It felt pointless. Every time I tried to say something, to explain myself, it was like they already had their minds made up. I wasn't the daughter who mattered. I wasn't the one who deserved their attention. I wanted to scream, to ask how they could possibly say such things when I was just trying to be there. But all I did was stand there in silence. The weight of their accusations pressed down on me, and I felt smaller than ever before. My brother, who had been talking with some friends nearby, noticed the tension in the air and walked over. But even he, who I thought would have my back, didn't seem to see the situation the way I did. He just gave me this tight, polite smile and said, "Hey, we're glad you made it. But, maybe you should have called before showing up so late." His words stung more than anything else. It was like I wasn't even a person to him, just an inconvenience. I stood there, feeling completely alone in a room full of people. I was a mess, physically and emotionally, and as I stood there trying to keep it together, the feeling only grew stronger. I wasn't wanted here. Not really. I could feel the weight of the accusation sinking in as my mother's words echoed in my ears, stealing the spotlight. The more I tried to explain, the more the sting of her words dug deeper. But her voice wasn't just criticizing my timing. It felt like she was attacking everything I'd ever done. It was the same pattern, always. I thought about how many times I'd been overshadowed by my brother, how many of my successes had been swept under the rug while his were praised, celebrated. No matter what I did, I was never the one they'd brag about. Growing up, it always seemed like my brother could do no wrong. He was the one who excelled at everything he tried, from sports to academics, and the one my parents took pride in. He didn't even need to try, it felt like. And there I was, trying my hardest to get a sliver of attention or approval. But it always felt like it was never enough. I got good grades, but my brother got better ones. I worked hard in my job, but it was never enough to get the kind of praise he did when he landed a new project. It didn't matter if I put in the effort. It didn't matter if I achieved something big. The spotlight was always on him. My mom's voice cut through my thoughts again, louder now. "Why do you always have to make everything about you?" Her words burned like fire, and I could feel the tears threatening to spill. It was the same thing she'd always said when I tried to do something for myself. When I succeeded, I never got the congratulations. When I failed, it was like I had failed the whole family. I tried to brush it off, to ignore it, but in moments like this, it felt like every harsh word, every side glance, was coming crashing down on me all at once. And right here, at my brother's engagement party, of all places. It wasn't even about the crash anymore. It wasn't about me being late. It was about this constant feeling of being lesser than my brother, of being the one who wasn't the favorite, the one who had to constantly prove herself just to be noticed. My heart thudded in my chest as I fought to keep my composure. But it was hard. The words kept ringing in my head. My brother's fiancée, Emily, stood nearby, looking unsure of what to do. She could see the tension building between me and my parents, and I could tell she was uncomfortable. She didn't know what was going on, but I could feel her eyes shifting between us, unsure if she should step in. She looked at me like she wanted to say something, but I could see her hesitation. It wasn't her place, and honestly, I didn't know if I wanted her to say anything. What would she say? Hey, stop treating your daughter like this. It wasn't that simple. The party around us started to shift, the vibe turning from lively to awkward. The music didn't seem as loud anymore, and the conversation seemed to pause as whispers began to spread through the crowd. I could hear people talking, their voices low but just loud enough for me to catch snippets. Did you see her face when she walked in? Something's up. Is she okay? I've never seen her like this before. It felt like every eye was on me. I wasn't just the late one anymore. I wasn't just the one who had shown up at the wrong time. I was the cause of the discomfort, the one who had disrupted the celebration. It was a nightmare, and all I wanted to do was crawl into a hole and disappear. But I couldn't. I had to stand there, like I always did, trying to hold my ground even when I felt like I was sinking. My mother's eyes were burning holes into me, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. I could see the judgment in her gaze, and I hated how it made me feel, like everything I did was wrong, like I was the problem. I wanted to explain, to tell them that I wasn't trying to ruin anything, that I wasn't trying to steal the spotlight. But every time I opened my mouth, the words seemed to get stuck. What was the point? What could I say that would make them understand? Would they even care? Instead, I just stood there, feeling the weight of their disappointment pressing down on me. I tried to hold back the tears, to keep everything together, but the more I stood there, the more I felt like I was suffocating. I couldn't take it anymore. I tried so hard to stay composed, to hold it together and be the person I thought they wanted me to be. But the more I stood there, surrounded by people who either didn't understand or didn't care, the more I felt like I was suffocating. The cold stares, the judgment, the feeling that I was nothing more than an inconvenience at my brother's engagement party. It all hit me like a wave. I just had to get out of there. Without saying a word, I turned and walked away from the crowd. I could hear my mother's voice calling after me, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I stayed, I was afraid I might explode. As I made my way outside, the cool night air hit me like a slap in the face. It felt so much better than the suffocating atmosphere inside. I leaned against the brick wall of the venue, taking a shaky breath, trying to calm my racing heart. But the tears came anyway. I stood there, letting the tears fall freely, feeling the weight of everything I'd been holding in for so long. I had always tried to be strong, tried to keep up this facade that I was fine, that I didn't care about my family's favoritism, their indifference. But now, standing in the quiet of the night, all that pent-up emotion came pouring out. It wasn't just about the crash. It wasn't just about tonight. It was about everything. The years of trying to be seen, of trying to matter, the countless times I'd worked my hardest, only for it to feel like my efforts were dismissed, like nothing I did was good enough. I remembered all those family dinners where my brother was praised for every little thing, and I was left in the background, never receiving the same attention. The times I thought I could share something exciting, whether it was a new job or a small victory, and my parents barely even acknowledged it. All those little moments piled up into something so much bigger. And tonight, with everything that happened, it all came crashing down. I stood there, crying in the dark, feeling so utterly defeated. I thought about the years of feeling invisible, the constant feeling that no matter what I did, it would never be enough for them. The feeling that they didn't love me the way they loved my brother. I could hear their voices in my head. Why do you always have to make everything about you? How many times had they said that over the years? How many times had I been made to feel like I was the problem, like I was the one who was always wrong? I was torn. Part of me wanted to go back inside, apologize, beg for their approval, and pretend everything was fine. I wanted them to love me the way they loved my brother. I wanted to be the child they were proud of, the one who mattered. But as the tears slowed and the anger began to bubble up inside me, I realized something. I don't need their approval. I didn't need them to validate me, to tell me I was good enough. Their behavior wasn't just a series of mistakes. It was a pattern a toxic one that I had let myself be part of for too long. And deep down I knew I couldn't keep letting them control my life, my happiness. I couldn't keep sacrificing my own worth just to earn a love that wasn't even really love. It wasn't real. I wiped my tears, took one last shaky breath, and straightened up. In that moment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let them hold me back anymore. I wasn't going to keep living in the shadow of their expectations, constantly fighting for a place at the table that they weren't willing to give me. From this point on, I was going to do things for myself. I would find my own path, my own happiness, away from their constant judgment. I wasn't sure where that path would lead, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally free. And I wasn't going to let anyone, especially my parents, take that away from me. The night felt endless. After I stepped away from the chaos of the party, I didn't know what to expect anymore. I was emotionally drained, questioning everything about my family and myself. I thought that was the end of it, that the party had already been ruined, and I was just going to fade into the background once again. But what happened next surprised me. As I was getting ready to leave, feeling defeated and just wanting to go home, I saw my brother standing near the entrance. He wasn't with anyone else. It was just him, standing there looking uncertain. He looked different, like he was struggling with something. I didn't expect him to come over to me, especially not after everything that had gone down earlier, but he did. "Hey, can we talk for a minute?" he asked, his voice low, almost apologetic. I didn't know what to think. After everything that had happened, I didn't expect him to acknowledge any of it. But as we found a quieter corner of the venue, he surprised me once again. "I know things have been tense," he began, hesitating. "And I'm sorry. I should have said something earlier. I should have stood up for you." I was taken aback. I blinked at him, unsure how to respond. My brother, the one who had always been the golden child, was actually apologizing to me? He continued, "I've seen how they treat you, and I know it's not right. I've seen how they always put me on a pedestal while you're just pushed aside. And I've been too focused on myself, too caught up in all of this to realize it. I'm sorry." My heart twisted in my chest. I never expected him to say something like that. Over the years, I had always wished for him to notice how badly I was treated, to say something. But now that he finally was, it felt like the weight of everything was coming down all at once. "I should have stepped in," he said again, "but I didn't, and for that, I'm sorry." I stood there, speechless, not knowing whether to be angry, relieved, or just sad. It was as if I had been waiting for this moment forever, and now that it was happening, I wasn't sure how to process it. "You don't have to apologize," I finally said, my voice shaky. "But I can't keep living like this. I can't keep hoping they'll change, or that they'll see me the way I've always wanted. I've spent too long waiting for that." He nodded, his expression serious. "I get it, I do. And you're right. I think it's time we both stop trying to get their approval. It's not worth it. Maybe it's time we create our own family bond, one that actually supports us, instead of tearing us down." I felt a lump form in my throat. For the first time in my life, my brother and I were on the same page. We didn't have to fight for our place anymore. We could build something new together, something different from the toxic dynamic that had always been there. We stood there for a few moments, just quietly taking it all in. I realized then that maybe the crash and the drama at the party had led me to this moment of clarity, of change. My family may have always been a source of pain, but I didn't have to let them dictate who I was or how I felt. "We're going to be okay," he said quietly, as if trying to reassure both of us. And for the first time in so long, I believed him. We didn't need our parents' approval anymore. We didn't need their judgment. We could find our own way, make our own rules, and build a bond that wasn't based on resentment or expectations. As we left the party, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from approval or validation. It was the kind of peace that came from knowing I was finally taking control of my life. I was free from the toxicity, free from the constant fight for recognition, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. What happened that day changed me forever. The crash wasn't the worst part. It wasn't the pain or the confusion in the hospital or even the awkwardness at my brother's engagement party. No, the real turning point came when I realized that I didn't need my parents' approval to be happy. For so long, I had been chasing their validation, hoping they'd finally see me, finally appreciate me for who I was. But in the end, it wasn't about them, it was about me. It took a crash, both literally and emotionally, for me to realize that I had been living my life under their shadow, trying to fit into a mold that wasn't mine. The freedom I felt after that conversation with my brother, The peace that settled in when I stopped expecting them to change was something I'd never felt before. I realized that the only approval I needed was my own. What do you think? Have you ever felt overshadowed by family, or like you were never truly seen for who you are? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop them in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories just like this one. Thanks for listening.